Right, so I'm Marissa Trew from Aptos Labs, and today I am joined by Ridwan Otun, the VP of Engineering and Product at Juicyway. Juicyway is a Nigeria-based cross-border payments platform connecting African individuals and businesses to the global economy, servicing over $3 billion in processed transaction volume. So we're here to discuss their strategic integration with Aptos to leverage its stablecoin rails for treasury and settlement operations across Africa and global markets. To kick off the conversation, tell us more about this news. What is the integration? What does it change for businesses who are actually using Juicyway?
We've integrated the Aptos blockchain to help businesses facilitate quicker payments, quicker cross-border payments. Historically, making international payments from, this part of the world usually involves multiple banks, multiple ops, and what this means for businesses is increased transaction fees, slower settlement times, convertibility into like the stages of the payment process. So what Aptos does for us is helps us, shorten the settlement times and also puts a bit of visibility into the process since it's based on, blockchain technology. And another important aspect is access to actually deep USD liquidity to get USD for facilitating maybe it's supplier payments, maybe it's settling bills, maybe it's moving money to operating accounts and stuff like that, right? Sourcing for the USD liquidity from the local currency can be a huge hassle, but when stable coins come into the mix, it makes it a bit easier to get liquidity, and then facilitating payments on chain helps increase the speed of the transaction. Once you make the transaction on chain, then the recipients can decide from it to actual USD. So that's where Aptos helps us achieve at this stage within the context of international payments for businesses in this part of the world.
So when we're talking about payment settlement for a business that's trying to move money across the globe, they're facing pay processes, they're facing high friction, and they're facing multiple transaction fees that ultimately compound to make it too expensive and too slow. So from what you shared, Aptos not only provides faster and cheaper settlement, but also there is the existing stablecoin liquidity on the network that gives African businesses that access. Juicyway serviced $3 billion in volume largely through word of mouth and through enterprise clients. What does that growth actually signal, and what does that tell us about the depth of the unmet demand in the African market?
Yeah, I think it's a huge signal that, making payments in this part of the world still is a huge problem for businesses, right? It tells us that businesses actually need USD liquidity. Businesses need to make international payments. Businesses need efficiency, and businesses need cheap ways to make this payments. Because at the end of the day, right, it's affects the bottom line. When you're reducing the fees by multiples, it helps you operate more efficiently. This is the reason why a lot of businesses have decided to use Juicyway because cost savings, speed of transaction, and visibility into the payment is done is comfort to users as a platform.
So when it comes to the perception of stablecoins as well as blockchain infrastructure amongst businesses, is that still a learning curve or a challenge? There's still a perception in many markets that stablecoins are primarily a crypto native tool or even a speculative tool, while the use case in Nigeria and other African markets actually looks quite different. So how do businesses receive the technology that's being used to process their payments? And is that a challenge or is that actually a help?
I think it goes both ways, right? A lot of businesses are very comfortable in this part of the world using stable coins, but historically, we've also had some friction with regulators. Some businesses are a bit reluctant. Am I breaking law here? Am I breaking rules? Right? But a lot of that is, slowly dissipating because there's more regulatory clarity now. The government is more open to cryptocurrencies. right? So most businesses are warming up to the idea of stable coins as actual currencies as opposed to speculative tools, right? And in this part of the world, it just makes sense, right? Especially since those stable coins are near one to one with the actual USD. So when we provide tools that kind of blurs the line between the stable coins and the USD, it gives users a bit of comfort because they don't have to worry about actually interacting with the stable coins or making conversions, doing all those things, right? Because you're sort of putting a layer of abstraction on it. So it feels quite seamless, quite native, right? But overall, businesses are generally warming up to the idea of facilitating payments with stablecoins in this part of the world. Nigeria, especially, like is a bit ahead of the curve, right? With other markets catching up. But the perception has changed over the last couple of years.
So essentially, what we're saying is that while a lot of businesses are waiting for more regulatory clarity, platforms like Juicyway do a job of abstracting the crypto native component or the technical component of the payment experience. So Juicyway has also been quite vocal about longer term vision of enabling direct settlement between African currency pairs without having to route through the dollar. I think a lot of the conversation around stablecoins tends to anchor around USD. So, what sort of inefficiencies does routing through the dollar actually introduce that we tend to overlook?
Yeah, that's a very good question. To do business within Africa is extremely difficult because there's literally no central like settlement scheme or money network to put it loosely within the African ecosystem. You can easily go from, let's say, Naira to Ghanaian cedis, have to convert your Naira to USD, then USD to the cities. I think a lot of this is due to multiple things. Demand for those local currencies globally, right? And also a lack of organization around providing, that network layer, that infrastructure across the African currency ecosystem. And long term, that's our goal, right? One of our goals to make it ridiculously easy to move from one African currency to the other, to conduct trade between African countries without having to go through the USD. I think that's going to be huge for the continent because we are talking time gains. We're talking monetary gains because the transaction fees are just going to be at least cut in half. And that's going to go like a long way for businesses in this region. Yeah, so today the inefficiencies exist without doubt, but it's a gradual process.
So essentially, there is demand for direct African currency pairs that could bypass the US dollar just for the sake of time, efficiency, and again, cost. But then what actually needs to happen to enable that direct settlement? And how does Juicyway insert itself into that equation to potentially be the provider of that direct settlement?
There are multiple approaches for situations where currency exchange needs to happen. We have that automated matching system, like an engine that basically orchestrates all the currencies from the different users. Like at that stage, we would already have users from different uh, countries in Africa bringing money into the system. We have, those liquidity from the different markets. And then the system just automatically orchestrates uh, conversions and money movements based on the demand and need that happens on the platform. So basically, we're acting as, for a lack of a better word, marketplace where suppliers of currencies and people that actually demand those currencies made like some sort of market square where people interact with each other without them, actually interacting with.
And so, based on this level of automation, are you essentially suggesting using smart contract as a means of trading currency pairs?
Yes, that's one method that we can take, right? Another method we could take is, just having a matching algorithm. Say, for example, an individual in Nigeria is trying to pay for something in Ghana. they have Nigeria Naira in their account. All they have to do is specify that they want to pay out Ghanaian cedis. On the other hand, there might be a Ghanaian that just needs to make some payments in Nigeria, right? The system automatically routes those currencies. So the Ghanaian cedis from the Ghanaian would be used to pay in Ghana, while the for the Ghanaian in Nigeria. So that efficient matching system just runs in the background and orchestrates all these settlements and payments.
And then going beyond the Africa market, there was also mention of intent to build an Africa-Asia corridor. So how does Juicyway actually intend to build this, and what role does, the Aptos integration actually play in making that possible?
Yeah, so as you said, like the mission is basically to increase the participation of, Africans. And so when we're talking about, in intra-African trade, we're also talking about, trade with China, trade with the West, which already happens today, right? But people have to go through hoops and loops to be able to, fulfill those fulfill their financial obligations to, perform these trades with these different markets. And that's where Juicyway, is really going to shine, because we are just going to be that platform layer that helps, facilitating a payment within this corridor, right? And with the Aptos integration and the network, right, we can easily move, and also with stablecoins as like a very huge pillar in this cross-border money movement. We can easily move money across jurisdiction in like fraction of seconds. Aptos, provides this network, this layer for us to be able to do that.
The global connectivity of Aptos as a technology really facilitates what Juicyway is attempting to do, which is to connect the Africa market to the rest of the world. A part of this comes down to how receptive various businesses are to stablecoins. And then I think when we look at the way stablecoins have been adopted internationally, we do see a variety of use cases. The utility in one geography is not necessarily the same in another. So how would you actually describe the current stablecoin payments landscape overall in a way that both challenges and benefits Juicyway as a platform?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. When you make it ridiculously easy to withdraw those stable coins and move it around. So it basically feels like banking, right? For example, your Naira or your USD today, you can put in a fixed account that's going to earn some interest over a period of time. But also it can be in a savings account that earns interest, send it to your friend or purchase something. I think that's the level that, stable coins are gradually getting into, because year in, year out, we keep seeing the transaction volumes increasing. We keep saying people, putting the money away to earn yield for a substantial period of time. So I think the more ubiquitous stablecoins gets, the better it's going to be. The easier transactions are going to be. Money can just move freely between parties, but a huge barrier to that is, interconnectivity and the willingness for different participants within the financial space accepting stable coins as an actual legal tender, as opposed to just a speculative tool.
Right. And I think that's where the regulatory landscape really gets the most amount of momentum, because as we've seen, regulations accelerating worldwide, but often there are different mechanisms, there are different paces, and there's still an element of fragmentation across international markets, and trying to reconcile that is going to be a critical piece in terms of this global financial system. The original utility of stablecoins being sort of this off-ramp against the speculative and volatile crypto economy. But now what we're basically seeing is it's kind of matured in a way where it's become a lot more useful. And so is this a matter of waiting for businesses to register that the original intent behind stablecoins just doesn't look like it did back then?
Yeah, I think so. And I think a lot of community focused work and education still needs to happen. people need to feel more comfortable knowing that this can actually be a proper legal tender, and not just tools for speculation. For example, in the US, there is the Genius Act, and in Nigeria also there is a relatively similar regulation. So I think over time people will get more comfortable with it, but also I think we need to explain what stable coins are, the benefits, how it helps to speed up transactions, how it saves money for you, it reduces the over reliance on traditional financial institutions. That education has to happen, and it has to happen on a rolling basis, like an ongoing basis. It's continuous.
So we're talking about both grassroots community level education, but also having to drive from the top down in terms of the regulatory level. You mentioned the Genius Act a moment ago. Do you find that African markets are taking regulatory progress in the US as a signal to embed and adopt this technology into local jurisdictions, or is there momentum in and of its own right?
I think there's motivation in its own right, because even before the Genius Act was announced, Nigeria was already trailblazing in that regard. But what I think the Genius Act does is sort of signal this is actually viable. There is something here. So for people that have had cold feet, it's change their minds and provide like clarity.
So it's like a legitimacy signal.
Yeah, yeah. But Nigeria and a lot of other countries already working on this, and we're already comfortable with population interacting with stablecoins.
We spoke briefly about how access to USD stablecoins facilitates faster and cheaper payments, but then also the creation of African currency pairs or African Asian currency pairs that don't necessarily need to bypass through the US. Those two sorts of, like, how do those two strategies come together in a way that facilitates just better payments overall?
I think it's two sides of the same coin. Because, for example, imagine we're able to tokenize majority of the African currencies and they're just one to one. We can essentially move the entire economy on chain. So that we can easily move from one currency to the other, because everyone, like, access is democratized, basically, right? Transactions can be facilitated by smart contracts. Uh, it literally just opens up the entire economy, right? It's now accessible to all and it's on chain. And each of these currencies have their stablecoin analogs on chain. So that in itself facilitates movement of those currencies, spending of those currencies easily. And on the flip side, yeah, interacting with currencies outside of the US, outside of Africa, right? For example, the US stablecoins. We've got USDC, USDT. In Europe, we've got the Euro coin, EURC. I'm sure other jurisdictions would come up with their own native stable coins. And it's just a matter of orchestrating between all these currencies that are now on chain.
Right. So there's a future in which we're looking at stablecoins that are pegged to African currency specifically. And then, as you said, that all feeds into the vision of bringing the entire financial system on chain. So what are actually some of like the prevailing challenges when it comes to integrating blockchain-based payments? And what is the gap between this potential and the reality of where we currently sit?
I think it's organization, one, then two, regulation. Finally, I think it's going to be fight back from the traditional financial institutions, because literally no one wants to give away their power or modes, right? But it's bound to happen. It's just a matter of time. So those are the three major challenges. And considering the new era that we're slowly moving into, which is the era of intelligence, like stablecoins feel like the natural, monetary layer for things like AI agents and stuff like that. So self-organizing and have agents interacting with each other, conducting monetary transactions if everything is on chain. And there's a visible audit trail uh, in the form of, transactions on the blockchain network.
So as this wave takes place, how does Juicyway position itself within that momentum to make sure that it's there to capture the opportunity as it comes through?
Yeah, so by providing, a platform for users within different jurisdiction and organizing users from different countries to use our products, right? We sort of provide a central point for these interactions. And by integrating into these different networks, different stablecoins, right, we can provide a singular API for interacting with multiple networks, interacting with multiple cryptocurrencies. So just being that central orchestration layer.
So what does success materially look like in both the short term and the long run vision for Juicyway?
In the short term, the goal to always serve our customers in the best way possible. So if we are able to increase the settlement time by, even if it's just 30 minutes, that's good. If we're able to save our customers some transaction fees, that's good. If we're able to encourage people to move more of their transactions on chain using stable coins, that's good. So it's all about the transaction volumes, it's all about the cost savings, and it's all about reducing the settlement times.
If you illustrate a moment in time where you could say, we've made it,
Mm.
what would that moment look like?
Uh, I'd say for Juicyway, I'd say if we're able to at least bank at least 30% of the African population and make them crypto native, I think that's a huge win for us. But in the wider term, it's more about bringing more people into the stablecoin ecosystem and sort of giving that level of freedom to people who want to transact and increasing participation within the global economy. That's literally what success looks like.